Well, welcome back, folks. This is the second of the series on the little Kawasaki F6A 125 1917 model. If you recall, this is the second bike I ever owned, the first bike I bought with my own money. I wasn't necessarily intending to get in this level of detail on this bike with this recording that we're doing today, but I ran into something when I went to pull the carburetor out to check it that was unexpected. In fact, I ran into two things that were quite unexpected when I got inside of the case behind the cover behind the carburetor's behind, and that ultimately led to a little bit further investigation. And I had two relatively serious issues that I had to address. So that's what this video is all about. Two surprises I found when I got in there. And let's go take a look at what I discovered. This is the right side of the F6 125. This is a rotary valve engine, and because of that, the carburetor actually fits on the side of the engine right here. In fact, this black rubber-ish spigot, what they call the spigot, is what the carburetor mounts to. And then inside of the case here is a rotary valve that spins, driven by the crankshaft, of course, that controls the fuel induction into the lower end of the engine. So there is no carburetor mounted on the cylinder as you typically see in a piston port motor. Kawasaki used a rotary valve design on their early Enduros. In fact, they used it for quite a number of years, all the way up through the 350 Bighorn. Though it's a little bit more complex than a piston-ported engine, the benefits, as I understand it, is that it allows better control of fueling and timing of the fuel intake. Anyway, the problem that I ran into, and here's the cover that fits on the side of the engine here. I put the bike up on the stand a couple of days ago and went about my business pulling. There's just 3 screws that hold that cover on, pulled the screws out. And as soon as I loosened the screws, and I've had this cover off a number of times in the past. It's been in quite a few years, but I've been in here before. As I loosened the screws and started to pull the cover off, oil started to run out, and it was green 2-stroke oil. And as I pulled the cover, it just gushed out, and I ended up with a real mess on my hands here. I had oil all over the place. And the carburetor, which is off right now, obviously, up on the bench, but the carburetor float bowl was full of oil. Everything in here was full of oil. You can still, in fact, see, I haven't really cleaned this cover. I've drained most of the oil out of it, but you can see the residual here at the bottom, that green color. And this was flooded with oil. I don't think excessive oil got into the lower end. I have not checked it yet. I think the rotary valve was in a position that it prevented oil from going into the lower end of the engine, which you have to pay attention to, because if you get too much oil in the lower end, and you go to kick it over, you could create a hydraulic lock and bend the crank or the connecting rod or damage something inside or seals. So I have not attempted to do that yet. That is, turn it over. But I suspect there is not excessive oil in the engine. I think it came this way towards the carburetor. So what do I think happened? Well, my theory is that here's the oil feed right here. It comes from the oil injection pump, and it goes into the case here. Behind this banjo bolt fitting inside there is a check valve, and that check valve is to prevent this very scenario. That is, from oil flowing into the engine when the oil pump is not pumping. There's a little spring and a precision ball bearing in that check valve, and as the pump runs and is pumping, it creates enough pressure to push that ball bearing off its seat against the spring, allowing the oil to flow. When the pump stops, the spring isn't supposed to have enough tension to push that ball bearing back against the seat. So my theory is that somehow or other that check valve, which is in here, failed. Either some debris got caught in it, or the spring is weak, or something's wrong with the check valve. Now, it did not empty the oil tank, believe it or not. The 2-stroke tank had quite a bit of oil in it yet. I have already drained it, by the way, so the oil tank has been drained. And again, the oil level, I couldn't really tell what it was at originally because as I opened this up, the oil just flowed out. The repair is going to get a little bit involved. What I'm going to have to do is pull this whole cover off. Now this is the clutch basket is behind here. I have never, and since I've owned the bike since it was new, I've never had this cover off. I've never had to take it off. But behind here is a clutch basket, and there's obviously a gasket and a number of things going on here. So what I'm going to do is pull this off because to get at that check valve, it's back behind this cover. I have to pull the cover off to get it to check valve. Now the check valve is, I'm a little confused on whether it's still available from Kawasaki. It's listed as not available, but with a 2 to 3 day shipping time. I'm not sure how that squares up, but they are available new on eBay, as well as the O-ring that goes with the check valve. So my next step is to pull this cover off. I've got to remove the Kickstarter. I've got to remove 10 screws and pull this cover off. I already have, this is the fuel line right here. I already have that disconnected. And disconnect the cable going to the oil pump and a few other things. And obviously this is part of the carburetor right here. That's obviously the slide and etc. That I really don't need to do anything with right now. Just get it up out of the way when I go ahead and pull this cover. So I'm going to get this cover off next. I will show you most of that. I'll probably speed it up because again it's pretty straightforward and academic. 10 screws around the perimeter. I'm going to use my newer Makita impact driver to see if I can't get these screws out. I don't have a JIS bit for this, so what I did is I took a regular impact Phillips and flattened the tip enough that I can get a good seat in a JIS screw. I've done some experimenting around. I think that's going to work okay. It's not my preferred condition, but I think this will work great to get these screws out that have never been out before. So allow me to do a little reconfiguring here. I'm not going to show you everything like pulling the kickstart lever or arm and some of those things because that's pretty straightforward, but I will show you some of the work as we go along and show you what it looks like inside when we get there. It's about 15 or so minutes later and I think I have everything removed I need to remove to pull this cover off. Kickstarter is removed. The oil feed line to the oil pump, which comes in right here. The cable coming from the throttle to the oil pump. I have the rear brake pedal. It's kind of out of your view. It's down below here, pulled down and strapped down because I have to clear that to get the cover off. The fuel line here will come off with a cover. I don't really have to do anything with the cover per se. I got to get behind the cover, and so that's what this is all about. I did make up this little template for the fasteners that hold this cover on, like you can see here. It's a very common technique. It's not the scale, of course. But as I pull the screws out, what I will do is I will put them in their corresponding location on this little template. Because quite often they use different size screws around these covers. That's pretty common, and I don't want to have to go back and try to figure that out later by looking at parts diagrams. So I'll just, as I take each one out, I'll put it in its corresponding spot here. Some of these screws, like the ones that were inside the carburetor cover here, are pristine. Others that have been exposed over the years to elements like below here are starting to get a little rusty. Those are just standard panhead JIS screws. I will probably replace some of those. We'll see as I get them out and think it through. But we're going to go ahead now and start removing these screws. Again, I'm going to use my little Makita impact. I have never used this before for this process, but I think it's going to be a vast improvement over using the old-fashioned impact drivers that you smack with a mallet. I've had this since the early 1970s. It works great, except it does have some accessibility problems getting in some of these locations. So I'll do my best to stay out of your way of the camera here, but You have to forgive me if, in fact, I do get in your way a bit as I decide where I'm going to start here. And I think I'll just might as well start with this one right here. I'm going to work my way in a counterclockwise fashion like that. Wish me luck. By the way, this tool has a lot of power. It's got a lot of torque. So this is one of those things that you don't hammer, you finesse. So I'm going to have to stand up here a little bit, I think. Ah, that one came right out. Easier than what I would have thought. That one's stripped off, so I'm going to have to drill it out. It's not bad, only one of 10 screws, the head stripped out, and once you know it, it'd be the hardest one to get at. So I'm going to go ahead and drill that head off camera, and then I'll bring you back. What I used was a left-hand drill bit. In fact, I pulled this right out of the case, just like that. I have not removed the screw yet from the drill bit. This is a left-hand drill bit, which means it turns the opposite direction counterclockwise. And I just started drilling in carefully. It was good and sharp. And it's about the same size, pretty close to the same size as the shank of the screw, that is 6 millimeter. Might be slightly undersized from that. But as it went in, eventually it grabbed the screw, and I was drilling carefully. I wasn't, because I didn't want to break this off. And all of a sudden the screw just started to back right out for me. So I managed to just back the screw right out. And I think you can see there what that looks like. So it took literally 45 seconds using this left hand drill bit. In order to get this cover off, it's going to take a little finesse. We need to keep in mind this cover has not been removed since the bike was made in the early 1970s. So it's very likely stuck on there but good. So this is another situation where finesse and patience is a virtue. So what I'm going to do, got an old piece of scrap lumber out of my supply in the other building. It might be a little too big. I might have to cut this down a little bit. But what I'm going to do is try to get at this from the other side and start tapping it where I can get at it. And I'll also do a little bit of tapping like under here and see if we can't get this case started. Once it does start to move, then you've got it. It's that initial breaking the bond between the case, the gasket, and the engine that generally is the challenge. There's a little residual transmission oil in there, as you can see. I did drain the transmission a day or so ago, but clearly there's some cavity under there. But it did pop loose fairly easily. I think you can probably see that. So now I'm just going to have to work it off. There we go. I'm going to let that drip for a few minutes and see if we can't get that leftover oil captured. In the diaper there, and then we'll go ahead and finish pulling this off. So I've let this drip here for five minutes or so, so we'll go ahead now and pull the cover off and complete the pulling of the cover. Here's what the inside looks like. There. And right here is the check valve. I think you can probably see it right there. Get that in focus. Well, I had another little uh-oh on this. When I took it apart, I noticed in the bottom of the case, looks like a couple little teeth broke off. So there's really only three places those could come from in this motor, and that would be the clutch basket, the drive pinion, or the kickstart gear. And where they came from is the kickstart gear right in here. Let me zoom in for you and give you a better shot of that. I think you can probably see right where I'm pointing, there's some teeth missing. And that's the kickstart pinion. Then as you rotate this kickstart shaft, that rotates like this and engages this gear on the clutch basket to turn over the engine. Now I think, I'm not sure because I've never worked on this particular engine like this before. I think that's replaceable without having to split the cases. Now the shaft, I'm pretty sure. The shaft is damaged, which it doesn't appear to be. You'd have to split the cases to repair it, to replace this gear. But I think, I'm going to do a little research, but I think that gear can be replaced from the outside. Finding one, probably have to go on eBay, see what I can find, but if I can find a gear and it's replaceable from the outside, I'm going to do so while I'm in here. I am not, because of the nature of this bike, it's not really a rider anymore. I might putter around the yard on a little bit. But if I have to split the cases, then I'm not going to replace the gear. But I don't think I'll have to. But let's get back to the original problem we had here, which is the check valve. Well, there's the check valve and the O-ring. You can see it's a sealed unit. I think I can see the end of the ball, little ball bearing down in there, but right there you might be able to see it. But I'm not even going to mess around with it. You can get these all over on eBay for 14, 15, 16 US dollars, and I think it's listed as that maybe available Kawasaki part for like 12 something. This O-ring is no longer available from Kawasaki for sure. I will replace that because it's kind of flattened out. You can see there. You can get those on eBay as well though. So I'm going to replace both those parts with new. I'm not even going to attempt to figure out what went wrong. It's not serviceable anyway. So we're going to go ahead and replace those parts. So I'll have to order those. And here's an up-close look at the gear teeth off that Kickstarter gear. I am glad, by the way, it's a Kickstarter gear and not the clutch basket or the drive pinion. You can see them right there. So I got to investigate that further. And here's the carburetor. You can see there's oil. I tried to keep the oil cleaned up as I took it apart, but this whole float bowl is full of oil. And I haven't done a thorough cleaning of the carburetor. I just basically took a little brake cleaner and kind of flushed the oil off of it, the two-stroke oil, which was all over the place. but carburetor is actually in very good shape. I have more cleaning to do on a carburetor, certainly before it goes back on the bike, but what I need to do now is locate the purchase some new parts here and figure out what I'm going to do with that kickstarter gear. Well, it's a little while later and I've done some research on removing this drive gear, kickstarter gear, and according to the service manual, it's as easy as removing this snap ring right here and pulling the gear off. I'm not convinced of that, but we'll see here how that works. There's a snap ring. The gear wants to interfere with the shift lever arm right here. So let's see if we can get it out of the way. Like that. And there it is. Got 3 teeth missing. One there, one there, one there, and these 2 are beat up. Well, there might be bits and pieces of, in fact there is right there, gear teeth in the bottom here. So I'll have to clean this all out. Oh, I think I just found another tooth. Yep, there's another tooth right there. So I've accounted for all 3 of them, plus there's some debris in here, so I'll have to clean this out and wait for the new gear to arrive. I did find one on eBay, this gear, for like $9, and it's actually located about 50 miles due north of me, so I ordered it. I'll probably have it here in a couple of days.